Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 359th New Social Environment. I'm Catherine, and I'll be your MC today for a conversation between Joyce Kozloff and Ann McCoy. We're also very lucky to have the poet PJ Lombardo with us to close out our program. A few quick notes before we get started. The Rail team will be helping out with tech if you have questions. Closed captions are available by pressing the live transcript button at the bottom of the screen. We will have a Q&A after the conversation portion, so please write your questions in the chat and I'll call on you to speak, or I'm happy to read your question on your behalf. And feel free to use the chat now to introduce yourself, shout out where you're tuning in from. That's always fun. We start all of our events with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. The heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all those who struggle for freedom, and recognition that when it comes to liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation. In that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat for a living document of resources and actions, which I will post very shortly. And now to introduce today's guest and host, artist Joyce Kozloff is a major figure in both the pattern and decoration and the feminist art movements of the 70s. Her artistic practice fuses widespread cultural traditions, including applied and decorative arts, with an activist temperament. She has completed 18 public artworks in the US and abroad, and most recently, Memory and Time, which is in Greenville, South Carolina, opening to the public on August 16th. Our host today, New York-based sculptor, painter, and art critic Ann McCoy, is an editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. I will be posting full links to full bios in the chat. But for now, Ann, please take it away.
Oh, thank you so much. It is such a privilege to have Joyce Kozloff here. Such a privilege. I think that Joyce is one of the most admired women artists. And all of the women in my generation are just absolutely knocked out by her. I think that I would like to start with getting the elephant out of the room to begin with. Number one, Joyce does not have a crew of PhD historians doing her research. And number two, Joyce does all of her own work. And number three, she does not have an annex to her studio filled with little elves with fine paintbrushes. She actually does all of the work herself. I mean, this is staggering, especially since a lot of the women of our generation, I mean, a lot of us are just taking naps and burning out. So I just think that I'm thrilled to have an icon like Joyce. I would like to start, a lot of people know Joyce starting with the pattern and decoration. Joyce has a lot going on right now. She has this wonderful show up at DC Moore, where you have these incredible Civil War maps that were done by generals from both sides with this overlay of sort of the COVID history. And she also, for many of you who've been on the Upper West Side along Central Park West, Joyce has an amazing subway station that on 86 that I would suggest that you all visit. And not last, but Joyce also had was concluded in a wonderful review by Roberta Smith in the New York Times for the pattern and decoration show that's up at Bard. So these are the things that are up that you can see at the moment. I wanted to start very, very briefly with how I met Joyce and the role that Joyce had with the feminist art movement that started in New York, how she came to LA, and then how it went back again. So she was really one of the key figures. When Cal Arts first opened and on the grounds of an old convent before they had their current campus, Joyce's husband, Max Kozloff, was teaching there, and Joyce came out to Los Angeles, and she was really a key figure in establishing a kind of this ad hoc committee for women artists, which included setting up all kinds of consciousness raising groups. I was in a consciousness raising group that was part of this. And this was such an important history because she and Miriam Shapiro really kind of became radicalized and kind of helped to pioneer this movement in Los Angeles. And so I'm going to shut up, and I would really like Joyce to just say a few words about this because it's such an important moment in art history. And it was such an important moment, when in terms of radicalizing women on the West Coast, when the Art and Technology show at the LA County Museum had no women. Chana Horowitz was in the catalog, but there were no women on the cover. And this started a whole series of demonstrations and projects and everything. So Joyce, take it away.
Oh, just one thing. The ad hoc committee was in New York. The group.
Sorry, I knew I'd make.
Okay. I just don't want to, and the group we started in LA was called the LA Council of Women Artists. And it's true that this very ambitious, expensive show at LACMA called Art and Technology was a flashpoint because we had our first meeting, and that year, 1970-71, that I spent in LA was a moment of feminist organizing everywhere in this country and also around the world. And it was just a kind of explosion. And someone brought the catalog of that exhibition, which had a grid on the cover and faces of all these men, to the meeting. And so the women in LA, the artists who came to the meeting, and it was standing room only. And I was new, I had just arrived. I hardly knew anyone, but it was a very important moment in my life. And the group decided to make demands of the county museum and have an action at the county museum. And that was the first time that had happened there. So did I answer your question?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these consciousness raising groups were really pivotal. I mean, my consciousness raising group included Via Salmons and Barbara Haskell and Lucita Hurtado, who just recently died. And I mean, this really changed the course of Los Angeles art. You'd had people like June Wayne and, really kind of pioneering this, but this was really, I think that I wanted to give you credit where credit is due because you really changed the course of LA feminist art history as well as New York feminist art history. And I remember that. And I also remember that later on, I think in about 77, you did an issue of heresies. So you were involved with quite an interesting group of women. I mean, people like Mimi Shapiro, Joan Semmel, Judith Bernstein, Ida Appleberg, Nancy Spiro. So I just wanted to put you in that group. So I think I would like to start in, I think that we can actually go to your, I'm interested in going to your slideshow, and I'm interested in talking about several things, the historical layering of your work. And also we are going to be talking about a pivotal LA project later on. So let's jump in with your slideshow.
Okay. I'm jumping around, and am I supposed to move it, or are you guys moving it? Okay. This is one wall of a very new public art project, a GSA commission at a new federal courthouse in Greenville, South Carolina, which is opening to the public next week, the 16th of August. And a week from today. I worked on it for the last 3 years, and there are 17 panels in it. They are a combination of glass mosaic and ceramic tiles, and they deal with the history of textiles in that region, which was the predominant industry in the 19th and early 20th century. And they also deal with the history of labor and social history. And the two long walls, which I'll show you next, culminate in this wall, which drops from the mezzanine. And Chiquola Mill was the site of an event called Bloody Thursday, which was the worst massacre in American labor history. It was during the largest strike in American history in 1934. And textile workers were on strike in the small town of Honia Path, very near Greenville, The mayor of the town brought out a posse of local people. The town was only a couple thousand people, and everyone worked in the mill, and shot unarmed picketers, 7 of whom died, and many who went to hospital and were severely injured. In any case, I can't talk about this too long. This could be a subject for a whole lecture. But in researching this project and going there, there's no memorial to these people who, in fact, had an impact on the labor laws that were passed during the New Deal. The labor laws, I mean, at that point, there was child labor, there were 12-hour work days, there was very, very low wages, and all of this. I mean, in a way, these people were martyrs. So I put this on the end wall. Okay, you can go to the next one. So this is the left side leading to that wall and the right side leading to that wall. And the man you see is the architect. His name is Craig Brandt, and he's from a Chicago firm called HBRA. And I worked very closely with him, and it was his suggestion that I work in the niches in the room that he had already designed. And along the side walls, just to give you a sense of scale, the upper panels are 14 feet high, and they're way above our line of sight. Craig is in there really for scale. The lower panels are at eye level, and you can get much closer to them, and they are more detailed. The upper panels are Google Earth views of these mills in the region. And what I did was, for each mill that I used, I layered another layer with a textile pattern that was a product of that mill. And in the Google Earth view, I tipped the mill so that you wouldn't just see the roof, so that you would see it. The lower level is another part of textile history. And this is all, you know, my feminist thing, because so much of this was women's work, and so many of the workers in the textile factories were women, but not all of them. The bottom level on the left, the panels, the motifs around the maps, which start in 1630, are based on Cherokee baskets, and the Cherokee were driven out of that area, of course. And then on the right, the motifs around the maps are quilts, and then I chose the quilts for their backstories, but there's no time. Next one, next image. Okay, this is just to show you the detail of what these look like. On the left, the upper panels are ceramic tile, glazed ceramic tile, and my studies, which were 1/4 scale, were blown up and printed on those tiles. At the right, that's a little detail which shows you a combination of the glass mosaics, which made up the maps, and in places made up also the surrounding textile motifs. But these are tiles that are cut up and used in a mosaic kind of way. And the fabricators I work with, whom I've worked with since the 1980s, first the parents and now the son, are the Trevisanuto family in Spilimbergo, Italy, and also Stephen Miotto here in the Hudson Valley. They work together. Next. Okay, now we're going back in time. That was my most recent work. We're going back in time. And this was Anne's suggestion. She wanted me to explain how and why I first started working with cartography.
This was the LA Mexico series.
Yes. Yes. So this piece is from 1993. So it's almost 30 years ago. In the 80s, I did a series of public art projects, and not so much studio art. There wasn't time. But when you began a public art project in those days, the architect would send you floor plans, diagrams, blueprints, and I would have an architecture student make a simple cardboard model for me. And I would imagine myself in the space and start working out my ideas. And as I did this over time, it occurred to me that, I mean, I started thinking of these diagrams and maps. I'm thinking of them as maps that the architect first sent of the site and of the building as a kind of structure in which I could embed my content, my ornament, my cultural history. But then it occurred to me that I could use that device, that structure, in my private work. So at a residency, when I had a kind of quiet month, I started copying maps out of an atlas of cities I had lived in or spent time in. And then I went home and I was very busy with the public art. But a year later, I took them out of a drawer and started cutting them up and combining them. So this first body of work, which goes back to '93 on paper, are painting collages, which are not cities you would ever find. They're hybrids. They're combinations of different cities. And this one, which was the first one, and I always call the first piece in a series a pilot project, and often it's my favorite in the series. This is called Los Angeles Becoming Mexico City Becoming Los Angeles. I worked on 4 public art projects in Los Angeles in the 80s. So I had lived there and spent a lot of time there. And I also had spent time in Mexico City. So this is a combination of historic maps and decorative arts. And okay, so going from left to right. Next slide. Okay. The first one on the left, this is a 19th century property map of LA that I collaged onto with trees, like I was planting. And I was reading a book called City of Quartz at the time by Mike Davis, which was about the history of real estate development in Los Angeles. And I was thinking about that. So that's the map on the left. And the little things that I've embedded in it are my own work. I very often cut up my own work, particularly prints that are like leftovers or misprinted or off register, and I use them. So these come out of other artwork, and they're like trees I'm planting. And down the center and on the sides, through the center, there's sad angels for Los Angeles. And then moving into the next one, this is, no, go back. Yeah, now on the right, this is, there are 4 panels here. So I talked about the one on the left. The one on the right is the next one. And this one looks like LA at first, but it's Mexico City. So there are pieces of LA in it, pieces of Mexico City in it. And the Mexico City part has ancient pre-Columbian patterns painted into it. And when I got to the LA part, it was around the time of the Rodney King just this explosion around this event. And there was a lot of images of fire and burning in the city of Los Angeles. So I started painting out parts of it in black. That was the way that I could express what I was feeling and what I was seeing at that time. Next.
I think it's such an important piece because, I mean, with what's happening on the border today and the fact that so many people forget that California really was a territory with the mission systems, et cetera. They forget this whole history. And what I really love about your work often is that you take these occluded histories or histories that nobody wants to really think about or acknowledge, and bring them back in and weave them with this wonderful kind of layering. I think that this is really such an important pivotal piece.
It was for me. Thank you. And I worked with cities for a couple of years afterward, but this was very pivotal. Anyway, the third and fourth panel in it, and these were painted on 22 by 30 watercolor paper, but I just kept adding on it, and it became a kind of horizontal visual narrative. So the third one is a layering of two maps of the ancient city of Tenochtitlan, upon which modern Mexico City is built. And down through the center are death heads, which are very, very prominent in Mexican culture. And then moving to the last one, it's the reversal of the one you saw before with Mexico City and Los Angeles. The pieces I pulled out, I put back in, and it looks landlocked, so that the land on the left comes from Mexico City, which is not on the ocean as Los Angeles is. And that's where the pre-Columbian patterns are. And I have a kind of, because I'm thinking about these two cultures coinciding, but not necessarily easily. So there's a kind of almost a blood red river in between. And there is no river there. That's where the Pacific Ocean would be. And then, flying over this area, because I was going back and forth so much in those years, often coming in after dark, the city, the freeways look like jewelry, the lines of lights. And so what I did, I had a map, originally the map that I copied from the atlases, I copied them in the usual map colors, but I painted it out and just left the freeways. Anyway, we should move on, I think. But so then also this is a piece from the year 2000.
I was just going to say, for some of you New Yorkers, this was shown at Brick several years ago, and it's been shown many places, but it's been shown in New York several times. Once, I think, at DC Moore, and also at Brick. It was covered in a Brooklyn Rail article that I wrote. But do you want to? I'm just sorry to interject. Yeah. Go ahead.
So this piece has crossed the Atlantic Ocean more than I have. The Europeans like it more than the Americans because they see it as anti-American, which I guess it is. I made it at the American Academy in Rome in the year 1999. And I had been making little globes, tabletop globes. And I was in an enormous light-filled studio, and I started thinking I have to make a big globe. And I was the Temple of Bramante down the hill, which is a little jewel. Somehow the shape of that affected me, and also the Pantheon. And I have light coming through from the top. But I was thinking about aerial war for a couple of years, and someone told me about aeronautical charts, that you could order them from a US agency called NOAA, which I did. And I ordered charts, maps of all the areas in the world that the US had bombed. And I had them hanging in my studio in New York, and then I took them to Rome. I really didn't know what form it was going to have, but I was more and more upset about aerial bombardment as in my lifetime, what's happened is we don't see the victims, we don't experience the horror of it. And I wanted to make a piece about that. So there are 24 wedges, and I worked with wonderful Italian carpenters who figured out how to build it. And it comes together in 2 or 3 hours like a kit. It's kind of amazing. You can go to the next slide.
Can I say something funny as an aside? When Joyce had the show on at the same time this was shown at Brick in New York at DC Moore, she became obsessive with globes and had thousands of little globes in the show, little globe earrings. And it was so wonderful that this giant sort of, it was the microcosm, macrocosm thing sort of going back and forth. It was so humorous.
I'll show you next.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so this is a kind of distorted wide angle lens shot of someone inside. Actually, 3 or 4 people can enter. And one of the things that happens that I was not prepared for, I took it as a gift. is that voices are magnified, so that if two or three people are inside and talking to each other, it's like an echo, it resonates. And some people get scared. But for me, it made the piece more powerful since it's about bombing. And some of these are very minor skirmishes, some were major wars. I got the names of the places that we bombed. These are places that we bombed between 1945, at the end of after World War II, until the year 2000, when I finished the piece. So next slide. Next slide. Okay, this is just details of two of them. And it's actually Baghdad and Belgrade. Since they're painted on canvas and the canvas is glued down to the wood, and they're painted from different vantage points, the way an airplane would move through the air. So some of them, you have to tilt your head to look at them. Maybe not so much these two, but some of them are almost upside down, some are sideways. And I didn't paint them all in the same color, continuous color palette, as though it was a continuous world, because these are separate places, and I used a different color palette in each. The one thing they have in common is the history of the trauma of aerial bombardment. I think this is the end about this.
Oh,
we're working our way up to my recent work. So,
this is my favorite. This was a show that maybe not thousands of New Yorkers saw, but this was at the Alliance Francaise, and it was so wonderful because the French, of course, have a real problem with their colonial history and really not acknowledging it. And there was this, Joyce showed such chutzpah to take this hilarious exhibition and just sort of put it up in the front there. It was so wonderful. I mean, the whole time I was going through this show, listening to all the French people talking around me, I was having the hardest time not cracking up. It was really one of the high points of that season. So go on with the scholastic map.
Well, I should say that the director, Marie-Monique Steckel, is a friend of mine, and she encouraged me to do this. And we stayed in her apartment in Paris for 3 weeks, and she encouraged me to look for mapping subject matter and to do a show there. And I didn't find anything till like the next to last day. I went to the huge flea market, and I bought these school maps, French school maps from the 1950s that hung in classrooms. I bought it wasn't a special map dealer or anything. It was a school supply dealer. And I bought a couple, and then later my friend who lives in Paris went back and got more from her until I had, I think, 20 something of them, all of different parts of the world. And that was these maps. I should show the original what it looked before I doctored it, but I don't have that today.
There was also something different about these, and that was like in Algerie, alors, you had some fantastic archival photographs too.
Yeah, so what I did
of the troops, so that was sort of an element of photography that was historical photography that was added in, as I remember.
Yeah, the original maps are very, very 1950s. Maybe into the early 60s in their cartography and their graphics. And I worked on almost all of them at the Digital Art Studio at Carnegie Mellon with Fran Flaherty. This one was done a little later here in New York. But she and I figured out how to do this, and I went on the internet and every night, and I just scrounged around to find images to layer and change these things. And so I added current history, I added colonial history, and this one has images from the Vietnam War with us, and statistics, and across the bottom are book covers from the French period through the American period about these wars. I guess we can go to the next one.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Oh, these are pretty big. I mean, this piece with the two of them is 36 inches by 74 inches. And these were two of the school maps, one of Algeria and one of Tunisia. And I just went back in and layered and changed all the different passages. In some places, I'm adding the kinds of carpets the women wove in these places. Some places there are French occupying forces. Across the top of the one on the left, you see where the bombing went on during the war of Algerian liberation against the French. The big map there shows the parts of Africa that are Muslim. And the map on the right, all the different passages show different different tribal areas, and that relates to the different kind of carpets that were made. And then you see on the far right, the Arab Spring, which began in Tunisia and is hanging on by a thread now. But anyway, so I just, with each of these maps, I played as much as I could to bring in these different layers. And there are a lot of layers in them.
What's interesting to me is that this is a history. It's like the Mexican LA project, and this one, that these histories are still having a real effect. I mean, there are a lot of even third generation Algerians in Paris who were involved in some of the bombing. So that these are old wounds that haven't really healed, and that's what's so interesting about this.
These were shown in a space in Paris. I didn't go. I don't think it's a commercial space, but it was a group show, but it was a big space. So they evidently, I didn't go, but they evidently gave it a room, and people called it the reading room because people could walk from one to another and actually stand there and read it. And I really was happy to hear that. Anyway, we should move on to the next thing, which you referred to before. This piece is 120 inches by 120 inches, and it's painted on 25 panels, and it's called The Tempest. And now we're up to 2015. And it's all leading toward talking about the current work, but this piece is based on an 18th century Chinese map of the world as it was known in China. And it's in the British Library. And if you look closely, you can see the Great Wall across the top. And this
is an 18th century Chinese map of the world, as I remember.
Yes. And in Chinese cartography, all those little lozenges, the oblongs and the squares and the rectangles, they have words in them which are names of places. But I substituted everything in my flat files that I ever had, cut up, like all my old prints and source material. And it's a kind of very autobiographical piece in that sense, and cut them up and put them in so that they're not so much place names, they're little pictures. And then I started sticking objects on it. People always gave me things with maps and globes. And so it ended up, and then I went on eBay and found all this stuff, but it ended up having earrings and ashtrays and salt and pepper shakers and erasers and keychains and yo-yos. And they're all Velcroed onto the surface. This was just a really fun piece, a playful piece.
I think the thing that I found so wonderful about this show is that you have this wonderful kind of way that you move between sort of this childlike playfulness and the kookiness of just ordering all kinds of stuff over eBay, and then moving back into really hardcore political histories. It's the same thing with the French maps. And I apologize. I just want you to know, I know that not all there's been a huge war movement, both in France and in the United States. So not all of us are warmongers, but including a lot of people like Sartre protested Algeria. So I didn't want somebody to think I was making a generalization there. Anyway, I think these little globes stuck on this are hilarious.
Move to the next one. You can move in on them.
Oh, great.
The little guy standing up there in the upper left is Atlas Holding Up the World, and I found him on eBay. And a lot of the other stuff are the things I described. The other thing that gets added in there, I don't know if people can see on their screens, but some of these are pictures. Like to the right of the big globe in the center, there's a black and white picture. These are old engravings from the Age of Discovery that are in all the books. And I use all these books of cartography. And I was cutting them out and saving them for 20 years, not knowing what I would do with them. They're all the same image of the great cartographers pointing to the globe, explaining it. So there's another one below to the left of the big round one that looks like the breast. And then there's another one to the right. And these cartographers in their day were very, very famous because the Europeans were circling the globe and colonizing the rest of the world. And there was always a cartographer on board mapping it. And then the map would come back to Europe and engravings would be made and be circulated. And these cartographers were superheroes in their day. And they're explaining the world. Oh, can you see my pointer? Maybe not. But around that time, I read Rebecca Solnit's piece, Men Explain Things to Me. And I said, oh my God, this is like the visual representation of that piece. Anyway, I'm ready to move on from this.
I thought that the funniest thing in this whole exhibition was, didn't you have an enormous cookie jar or something in the shape of
yes.
You had bought on eBay that you plopped on a little one of those shelves. I thought that was hilarious.
I had 3 of them.
Oh.
And I didn't include them in these pictures, but they're, about a foot tall and they're extremely kitschy and ugly, but they're globes.
I love them.
Okay, me too. I have them somewhere. Anyway, this is the work that's currently at DC Moore. And the show is called Uncivil Wars. And when I went down to South Carolina, where we began, and for me, this piece is very connected to that piece that we started out with. I worked on it during the same time period. And my first day there, which was about 3 years ago, I walked across the street from my hotel in the morning to a massive cemetery across the street. And there, of course, were Civil War monuments, a cannon, an obelisk, a statue. But what really shook me up was, as you entered, there was a field of about 100 very small gravestones, which were soldiers, and each of them had a little cloth, fresh Confederate flag planted next to it. So you knew someone was doing that now. And I have no problem with the soldiers being buried there in their graves, but it was the field of flags. I started to hyperventilate. I got very emotional. And then I realized, which many people already realize, and we all know now, that we're still fighting this bloody war. So I decided to do something about it. And I came home, a friend of mine suggested that I look at Civil War battle maps, that they were very interesting. And these maps were made by soldiers and officers on both sides during the war. They didn't have the kind of tools we have today, so they're hand-drawn. And I fleshed them out and made them into paintings. But I only began this in the spring of 2020. I had all these maps on a pile in my studio for I guess about 1.5 years or 2 years, and I didn't know what to do with them. And then I had this idea and I was very unsure about it. I thought it was too obvious, it was too creepy, but I was gonna put viruses on them. Like, they were not locating the place where there was a disease, but as an expression of this underlying disturbance in our culture and in our history. So this is the Battle of Chattanooga. And I'm not going to describe the battles. I'm not a historian, and I'd probably make a mistake. But that was in Tennessee in 1863, and it was a victory for the North. But that circle, that big circle at the bottom, actually had all the information in the map, the title and the cartographer and the date and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh my God, I could make it into a virus. So that's what I did. And this map was a dark map. And that was a process they had called, I think, sun maps or something. They put it outside and it reversed dark and light. So it started as a dark map, and I kept it that way. And for me, these maps are drawings. And the challenge is, how do you make it into a painting? Through kind of have a physical presence of a painting. The weight, the density, the chromatics, the scale. This one, none of them are really big in this show. This one is 50 by 60 inches, and it's one of the larger ones. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So that's the virus that I mentioned. Okay, you can go to the next one. This is the Battle of Appomattox Courthouse, which was the final battle at which Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses Grant. And I was thinking about what that must have felt like. It was such a horrific war and so much death and so much tragedy, really. But the end of the war is always a moment of, at least on the winning side, of happiness. So I kind of treated the viruses like fireworks going off. And I find these viruses just by Googling online, and they're not all COVID, they're different viruses. But I found one like this that was exploding all over the place. I don't make them up. And I don't really know what else to say about these. It's all very, very new. I wasn't planning on showing them so soon, but we put this show together in 2 weeks, very fast, the beginning of the summer, and this is the last week.
For people seeing the gallery, first of all, there are a lot of these paintings. Second of all, none of us can believe that you did all of this work in a year. We think that, again, that you're lying about the little room of elves and that you'd never sleep. Or if you have some sort of protein supplement for those of us who are fading, we would really like that put in the chat.
I don't see it that way, but thank you.
Okay, we do. But
there are a lot of people who are much more.
Show of small drawings in a small room at DC Moore that is extraordinary, and I think that everybody should rush over there. And
that would be nice. I don't see it that way. There are 13 paintings in the show, and it was about 13 months. The drawings are from earlier bodies of work, and we're not talking about them today, but one is from 2003. They're excerpts from groups. One is from 2004 and one is from 2008. And they're all dealing with war, with American wars. And we added them for several reasons. One was to fill out the show. But two was because they complemented in subject matter and kind of deepened it to see this and to indicate how long I've been involved in this subject of war. So I didn't show, I'm not showing the little drawings today. They'd be hard to talk about. They're very intricate and detailed.
I just mentioned them because it's really, they are so extraordinary that when you're seeing this show, be sure to hit that small room because it's memorable.
Thank you.
Sorry.
And I want to say something about the galleries are really empty, not just my show, everybody's show. I go around because I need to see art. it's partly that the summer is considered a dead time, and then there's new fears of COVID. But I think it's partly a lot of people think they've seen it online. I've seen it, you know.
You know, it's interesting. You have this show of cartography, and also at Marion Goodman, there is which I've just written about for the Rail, a Robert Smithson show of cartography. So it shows that this is really, you know, up and running. But also we forget that this idea of mapping has been around for a while, since Smithson, of course, in like 60s and 70s, and also that Robert Moore in '94 did that incredible mapping show at MoMA. So I
goes
think
back much further.
Goes
back much further. Think Vermeer. Anyway, there's always been mapping, and it's a very interesting Smithson show. I recommend it too. But I was just saying that you know, I do think that a lot of people think if they've seen it online, they've seen it, and especially with very detailed work, you haven't. Anyway, this is Jackson, Mississippi. This is another battle, and some of these battles were actually in the cities or directly adjacent to the cities, and enormous carnage was done, in addition to the massive death. You know, they look kind of pretty, these paintings, and I am a decorative artist, and that is my sensibility, and it always ends up like this. You know, I'm not a lot of political art is black and white and gray, and I think that's how people expect it to be. And you know, if you go online and you see these pictures of the viruses, they're in those kinds of colors. Those aren't their natural colors, but those are the colors that they represent them with. And they look kind of pretty. Okay.
What's interesting to me about your work as a political artist is that it's so personal, and it's so invested with time and this care and detail. And then also the addition of personal histories. I mean, I think that it's some of the most interesting political art, because it's not so obvious in a strange way. It's really so multi-layered. It's quite important work. Very important work.
This one is one that I like a lot. This one is called the Battle of Petersburg. And this battle was, I don't know, something like 23 miles outside of Richmond. And it, you know, it was a Confederate victory, but a kind of Pyrrhic victory, because the Northern troops dug in, and there was a 292-day siege. And when Richmond fell, that was the capital of the Confederacy. So this battle really cost the Confederacy the war. And this map, like a couple of the others, when I'm sitting there and I'm painting all these words, and I don't know why I feel compelled to leave everything in. And for me, the details are fascinating, the things that I learned, which I don't know I could ever use or convey to anybody, but they're interesting to me. So in this map, there are all these names. They're not the names of places, they're names of people. And there are 3 or 4 others like that in the show. The names of people who lived in houses and everywhere in this county. There's no water around it. I just painted it blue. This is a map of this particular county where this battle took place. And so all of these place names are the names of people. And I think maybe the armies wanted to know who lived there, who would be sympathetic. Maybe they could sleep. I don't know. I'm just making it up. The other thing on this map is it's so detailed that where the rivers and streams are, it says good ford, bad ford. In other words, it's a good place to cross the river. It's a bad place to cross the river. So there's all that kind of information. If you go to the next one, there's a detail, which you can see some of this. The next slide. Okay, so you see the virus, and to the right of it, there's a couple of places where it says vacant. And I guess those were empty houses. but I see two of them over there to the right of the virus, one slightly to the right and one almost toward the end of the page. But all over this map, there are things like that, these kinds of tactical information, very specific, so these maps were very useful, very important. And one of the things I read is that in battle, if a soldier on one side killed a soldier on the other side, and that soldier had a map in his pocket, and the survivor took the map, that was like war booty. That was very, exciting thing to acquire. And some of these maps had blood on them, and some of the people who made them died in the battles that they had prepared for. So this one was almost the last one I painted for the show. And what happens with me in almost all my series is they tend to get denser as I go along. When I was in school, you were supposed to keep reducing, and that was never something I was able to do. Next. This is the Battle of Gettysburg. And this is a very detailed one. It has all those things, same things, all those names of people. And some of them say, Mrs. Smith, Dr. Smith. They even have their titles. It seemed like, there would be a cluster of Smiths in a certain area, so all the family members lived near each other. And as I'm writing them, I'm realizing that they're all Anglo-Saxon names. And I shouldn't have been surprised, because the waves of immigration to this country from other parts of the world and even other parts of Europe were mostly after the Civil War. I mean, sometimes you'll see some German or Irish, Scottish names, but mostly it's British, it's Anglo-Saxon names. And those are the people who are living in these places. And in this one, you see it's like a web. Gettysburg is at the center, and all the roads converged on it. So all the armies were marching to this place, and they knew there was going to be a battle there. And the virus is like I don't know. It's when I found it, I thought it was really beautiful, like a flower, but it's also like a kind of gaping wound.
It's interesting because right now we're living in a time, this is called Uncivil Wars. We're living in a time where many people are worried that there will be sort of a civil war in the United States.
Yeah.
It goes back to this, which is in a strange way, a kind of virus. The things like QAnon and all of this are kind of
that's what it's about.
And so that's why it resonates so much. I think I found myself really disturbed in a strange way, seeing some of this work and thinking about that.
Well, I have to say, I don't ever want to paint another virus. I'm really done with them. I left them for last. I spent great patience and time painting the maps. And then I put off painting the viruses, and I painted them when I couldn't procrastinate any longer. I'd paint them, and I painted them really fast because I didn't want to look at them, and I didn't want to.
They're much looser. They're much looser formally.
They're painted very differently from the rest of the paintings. And the other thing I didn't say is that I approach these maps. There's different kinds of painting going on in them. The maps themselves are very different one from another. Some of them are by men who were surveyors or cartographers in their earlier life before they were in the military, and they're very skilled technically. Some of these are just somebody's sketch who really didn't have that kind of skill. So and going and painting them, some of them required me to elaborate them more. Some of them had all of this richness and surface quality already. So there's just, I would figure out different, I didn't want to use this one is the closest to the colors you usually see in maps. And it was one of the earlier ones. And as I went along, I didn't want them to all look the same. And I didn't want to look at them if they all looked the same. So I just, in a way, they became like abstractions in terms of the color. I just went for different ideas and different kinds of paint handling.
Is this your last map in the series here?
Antietam, I didn't put it in.
Okay.
Next. You know what? Because I don't have a good reproduction of it yet.
Okay.
This is out of order. Unless, okay, is this the end there? There should be others. Okay, go back. I think I made my list wrong. So
I was going to say that.
This is Chancellorsville, which was a Confederate victory in Virginia in 1863. And again, that is a map of that county, and everything around it is not painted with anywhere near the same detail. But when you get into that map, there were all these names of people and places. We can go on to the next one. This is the Battle of Shiloh, which was probably the bloodiest. And it was in Tennessee. And I added this rather gruesome virus. First, I just had the round ones. And this was one of these very simple maps. That's all there was there. And I had to somehow build it up and make it work as a painting. And so all that kind of background noise I put in. And this slide is too light because it has a lot of fluorescent and iridescent paint, which tends to be reflective and is difficult to photograph. So it's not a dark painting, but it's not this light. And so it was hanging on my wall in my studio, and it really wasn't enough. It felt thin. And I think artists know what I mean by that. So I went back in and I put all this, movement behind it. And then I found this ugly, scary virus online and I added it. It's almost like a kind of sci-fi image to me. Next. This is the Battle of New Madrid in Missouri. And this was a really beautiful map that I was working with. I think you can see that. And I copy everything. I copy every little tree, every little bush. I love that. I mean, and it does have a kind of over patterning quality as a result. And I love calligraphy. I love different kinds of calligraphy. Calligraphy was my favorite subject in art school. I took it for 3 years. So, and it's helped me more than anything I ever studied. So I love all these different typefaces and the handwriting and I don't know what else to say about it. Oh, this was the Battle of Island Number 10. And the Island Number 10 is on the Mississippi River, right in the middle of the painting, the green shape. And on the river, a number of battles, on the rivers, also the Potomac, were on these little islands. Okay. This is Vicksburg, Battle of Vicksburg in Mississippi in 1983, which was a turning point for the North. It was a victory for the North. This seems to be everybody's favorite. Maybe it's mine too. It's about 60 inches by 41 inches. So it's a tall, narrow painting. And I'm going to show you a detail of it next. Just get an idea of how it was painted. I really enjoyed painting this one. And the shape of the river is so beautiful in the map. You want to go back one for a minute? Yeah. So, you know, it isn't like a deep night sky all around there, but that was where the map ended. And so I ended it there and had it in a kind of midnight sky. I don't know what else to say about it, but I think this might be the end of the slideshow.
Yeah, I think it's a because we really have, I'm sure there are a lot of people who have some wonderful questions.
Absolutely.
We should, great, we'll move back into there we go.
Yeah, do you have any final remarks you want to comment before we hear from the audience?
I would just like to thank Joyce. I think this was so wonderful. So wonderful.
I'm going to say thank you, Anne, for cheerleading and doing all the research and preparatory work. She put a ton of work into this.
No, I didn't.
It seemed that way.
As I said, you have no idea. I mean, Joy, there are so many of us older women and even younger women who just wonder, how does she do it? I mean, my God, it's just so impressive, Joyce. You have this huge fan club. I hope you know it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of love in the chat, just so you know.
All my friends, huh?
Yeah, lots of friends. Our first question, I'm going to pass the mic to GE, who is a NSE regular. GE, you should have a mic now.
Okay, hi, thank you. I have been waiting for this for quite a while. I love these maps. I just love this whole investigation, this practice. And I'm wondering, do you wish, especially with the war maps and that concentration and the way they have this sort of transcendence with space and everything, are you trying to create something like a great cascade of memories, a collective memories to help serve as triggers for activation?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, that would be wonderful. I don't know that visual art has that kind of power since Guernica. You know, when I go to political marches, there are more images of Guernica than any contemporary art. I mean, and I think maybe it's because film and video is a more powerful contemporary media for this kind of thing. But yes, of course, I mean, I'm a political activist in addition to being an artist, and one would hope, and many, many other artists are working on these themes, related themes. So, and some in very public ways, on billboards and on murals. You want to speak to an audience beyond the art gallery too. You want to speak to a more public audience. And the work that I just did in South Carolina, we're going to have a plaque which tells the whole story, so that, because my language is not, you know, realistic, you know, I don't paint the people fighting. It's more a kind of personal vocabulary, visual vocabulary that I have. That's why I have to do so much explanation each time.
I think that your role as an activist should also just be brought in really fast. I mean, during the whole Trump era, Joyce had women painting giant statues of liberties and everything for We Make America at her studio. I mean, it was amazing. I don't know how she. No,
many people were involved in that.
I know, but you were the big kahuna, the cheerleader.
I have a big studio, so we worked here a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, GE. And Joyce, just so you know, people are loving your mapped jacket right now as well.
Oh, it's a shirt.
Our next question comes from another Anne. A G. I will pass you AG. I will pass you a mic now.
Hi, Joyce. Okay, so I know your work really well, so I've followed it and seen many shows. But what I found interesting today was Ann McCoy saying a few times that she found your work hilarious. And it never occurred to me in any of the shows I've seen funny. So maybe the one about pornography, ornament, and maybe that was funny, but I see beauty and pleasure as strange bedfellows to some of the content that's so horrific about what humans do to humans in different countries. I think that you work in a kind of journalistic way with a kind of curiosity to both the horror and sort of you're also using color and decoration as a sort of visual pleasure. Makes me feel that there's also this kind of way that you light a way out of horror by the way that you work so diligently and so carefully. But I just never have thought of your work as funny.
Oh, I didn't mean all of her work. I meant just 2 exhibitions. The one with the French scholastic maps had some wonderfully humorous things in it. And also the one with the globes of the giant map room.
Yeah.
Those were the only 2 where they had, there's this humorous element, but I think it's also important.
Yes, I think humor is a good catch, is a good hook, you know, to get an audience in there. I don't know, but I just was curious what you thought of that.
First of all, Anne just had a show overlapping with mine, which just closed on Friday, which was so great. And she knows all about humor and pleasure and complexity in art. And if you don't know her work, Google it. Yes, I play with humor, and sometimes more in one body of work than another, certain pieces than another. It's like, you know, people like us, we can't do the same thing our whole lives. We do, you know, we're in a lighthearted mood, or we're in a grim mood, you know, or something strikes us as funny. And the Pornament series, you know, I was worried when people didn't laugh. It was definitely intended to be funny. Some of the other things that you mentioned, this current series, if people would find humor in it, I would be surprised. I don't think it's very funny. And maybe that's a flaw, because I love humor in art and I think there's far too little of it. But I have to admit, this body of work was I don't know how to say it. It was generated through anger and fear.
Also, the work you did at the courthouse doesn't seem funny at all. It seems like that's their triangle shirt fire, you know, that when you said, I don't know what that is when I'm looking at it, but down there, I bet they know what that is. I just found that really moving, and like, how
you know,
charged.
I don't think everybody does down there, because a gag rule was enforced and no one could go back to work in that factory if they ever spoke about what happened. And there were generations of people who didn't speak about it. And I also think the demographics of that, and it's a ruin. I mean, I didn't zero in on it. It's not an existing factory. It's a poetic ruin. And there's no marking on it. So that's why I wanted to do that.
Well, you did it. You did it right there. It's really amazing. It's very moving.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne. Our next question comes from Susan B. Susan, I will pass you a mic now.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. Well, as I know Joyce for many, many years, and I'm a huge admirer of her work and her spirit. And this last show I just thought was fantastic. Everybody should go see it in person if possible, because you can't, it's true what you said, the details, you have to really kind of get up close and go back, you know. It's really something that I feel is most visible in person. So I, you know, having known you for a long time and having looked at many, many, many shows of yours and going back to the feminist time, I know you're kind of ripe for a retrospective, but I wonder if you could like tie this work into your earlier work and also pattern and decoration and feminism. I know it's like, this is a big question. In fact, it's just something that preys on my mind is an artist has so many phases in their careers and so many, I love this last show also where you had a lot of childhood collages in it. So, you know, I just feel in each phase, you're kind of building on the last phase of your work or maybe the earlier parts of your work. So I wondered if you could comment on that. It's kind of a big question, maybe.
Well, I think all of us older artists find ourselves circling back. Yeah. And I look around not only at my work, but at the work of so many of my colleagues. And there is a kind of need to do that, I think, to pull things together. And, you know, there were all these threads that got lost along the way and something else came up that interested me or you. That I am going to have a retrospective in 2 years, and that's going to be a challenge for them, how to pull it together.
Oh, can you tell us where, or is it a secret?
No, it's not a secret. At the Everson, but hopefully it'll travel. We're talking about how to present the public art, because I did 18 of these projects, which are not going anywhere. They're permanently attached to walls. So we're even talking about virtual reality as a possibility. We'll see. We'll see if, if they can get the grants to do things like that. But for people who do work on site, and you're doing it, you're not thinking about it. I'm thinking in 40 years, I'm going to have a retrospective and how will I present this work? But so Susan, you raised a question that's very much in my mind. And the early decorative pattern work has been in these group shows the last couple of years, where they're revisiting that movement of the 1970s, both here and in Europe. And I look at it and I say, that's my juvenilia. I stand by it, but it was another person who did it in another time. And for me, that work was very political because it was looking at the hierarchies in art and art history between the high art and the decorative arts, and how that was so gender-based. But I think, it's been absorbed into the culture to a large extent. It's not as nearly as dramatic as it was at that time. These things broke down. I mean, everywhere we look in the galleries, we see ceramics, we see textiles, and I'm it's great. It's great. I mean, that was a Western male prejudice that some of us grew up with. Anyway, I got off on a tangent, and I don't think I answered your question.
I remember when you were talking about, I think being in, Uzbekistan or someplace and seeing this wonderful tile work in a great mosque and how moved you were. And I always sort of tied your interest in pattern and decoration and the interest in travel and all of this. I saw how it kind of moved into the maps and these different histories. I always saw it as sort of a continuum. I think that
in a certain way. I haven't been to Uzbekistan. I think I was probably talking about Iran.
Iran, it was a great mosque.
But I've been to a number of countries where I saw magnificent things. I've been to Morocco and Tunisia and India and Turkey. And
I think you were talking about tile work.
But the height is Iran. Isfahan is the height of Islamic ornamental art. I mean, I thought I died and went to heaven, and I never thought I'd get there, you know, considering the political situation, but I very luckily had the opportunity.
Susan said, thanks for your answer. So our next question comes from Jenny. Jenny, I will pass you a mic now.
Hi, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I was just wondering, you said that, Joyce, you said that calligraphy had been the most helpful part of certain part of your training. Could you expand a little on that and say how
calligraphy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised I found myself saying that. You know, I'm looking at these images and pulling things out. I had a very passionate calligraphy teacher in art school, and none of my other teachers were passionate about their subjects. And I think that had a lot to do with it. I mean, he would talk about the Holy Roman Letter and tears would come down his face. And I would just sit there and be, you know, and I wasn't very good at it. You had to be perfect. He made me do things over and over and over again. But I think that was a good way to learn. I mean, we were copying things. We were copying old manuscripts. And one day, there were not very large classes. It wasn't the most popular subject. He invited a group of us to his apartment. His name was Arnold Banks, and this was at Carnegie in Pittsburgh. And it was a small apartment. We were in his, I think it was a den or some kind of, and there were maybe 8 of us. And he brought out his treasures, which were like little pieces of manuscripts. And I don't know, it's one of my special memories of art school.
Thank you. Thank you. There's finding people who have that kind of passion is one of the great things in life. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Our next question comes from, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Simonetta, which I will read on their behalf. And here's the question. I wonder if you could say more about the act of copying. It strikes me as so anti-modern in a way when you did come to embrace this practice, and why? Thank you.
Well, a lot of people do it. I mean, Simonetta is a colleague and works in cartography also. Yes, I mean, you know, as kids we were told it's a no-no, copying is a no-no, but I was always good at it, and I always liked doing it. And then, you know, now they call it appropriation, and it sounds better than copying, but it is copying. And I don't know any other way to work at this point. I'm not someone who can face a blank canvas and just create an image out of my head. I have to start with something. And my sources are very important. I feel like I'm only as good as my sources. So part of my work is finding my sources. And they're my beginning point. And I always want them to be visible and acknowledged, as well as transformed. So I guess that's copying.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I think this is a wonderful, oh, and they said thank you in the chat. I think this is a wonderful moment to transition to poetry. As many of you know, we close all of our Zoom events, all of our lunches with a poetry reading. And today I'm very happy to welcome our poet laureate of the day, PJ Lombardo, to the Zoom stage. Quickly, I will introduce them. Chicago-based poet and essayist PJ Lombardo received an MFA from the University of Notre Dame and has worked as publishing assistant for Action Books. His work is forthcoming from or has recently appeared in Foothill Journal, Dream Pop Journal, Lana Turner Journal, and the Brooklyn Rail, among many others. PJ, I'm going to pass you a mic now.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you to Joyce and Anne for that wonderful presentation. I personally was not familiar with Joyce's work until just now, and now that I'm familiar with it, I really hope that some of your stuff finds its way to Chicago so I can take a peek, because I would love to see it in person. The textures, I'm sure, are incredible, and I would just really like to take a peek. So let me know if they're coming out this way, out to the Midwest.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, I'm PJ Lombardo. I'm gonna be reading. I guess when my first idea was just to read my Brooklyn Rail pieces for today, but I think I'm gonna read something a little fresher, because I think after the past year or two that we've all had, we could all take our chances and relax. So I'm gonna read some fresh stuff. It just took it out of my notebook the other day. So the series is called Disinhibitor, or Lay in the Flora. Magic carpet. Yowling affairs out blitz streaks, burly suns, hair full of gum, gleaming up amidst to tide the debts of us hapless, and party horses off Ativan. Is you an axle grinding past the cemetery and the prison, whistling seeds to pepper the violent hills on which drinks drink? Or could I carve your shoulders' winds, junket full of neon, pierce the belly and smooth the moon bodacious in its golden crisp treehouse, press it, call a preacher. 2, I'll yank the tailstring, hump a pile up in my swimming trunks, our sunglasses, our loving swimming trunks. Naked screaming in the phone booth. Hate to break it, but I'm not driving. I'm floating, bloating, flipping, dragging every ghost in the city on the hitch of my fined ass, sunned by many patient prophets in wait, ribbiting revelatory, dub in late spring, like a mask of flour which I do steam with truth. Prickly veggies of the arousal of the goat, mash 'em potatoes, fly the fluids out cradle, dripping down the swamp dancing cottonwood. Hell yes, every fear resounds, every party, every excavation's a resound. The lawn drunk bed of light. Flushing, dashing, absolutely have I marveled in the Colosseum, where centaurs graft their shadows to the time bomb of no rewinds. Have you heard them luscious rockets purr down the seamless pearlescence like a cabin past time? It's maddening, it's wide, too. Languish in the gangrene, bliss like steamed marshmallows, vegetables, left to juice in the mush, the prairie cooking with molten peanut oil. Keep honking, I'm reloading. Your breath, royal cayenne on the sundial, peering over every graze, and ashtray desert and saline lake and the fur of many primates lunging toward. Sometime I'll find who you clown as. Sprinkle of lavender in my powder wig, in my powder wiping a name. Banks of alligator rising, edged on a perch of a ring of alcohol to stain a swab of polish over my eye. Spun on a lizard's back from chilly to boiling, and you will lose my face to the passing half of this second, the passing half of every second totally smattered. Weeping idiotic at the florist's fair. Sunny downtown shock of blue, to shatter at the center, to flood the seam, cataracts felling, like slim clinks of crisis, caravanning across your ballroom to recall. I'm steaming, down the mucus swells and down the dancing light, down the sled paths of a tangled, fabled, cinematically down my waxy reflections on the myriad leaves. Hunt my face a cannonball, to rest in the shreds, to lay in the flora, like ballads beaten, thicker with the salt than thicker with the bruise. Ascendant demolition, beaded in my nose. Bullshit pacing in Calumet City. A linger in the elevator, dusted orange and cocoa, smothered in cigs, unattended garden. Hotel teases vacancy as my heart do as every shoulder. Dreaming of my cats on a roof cartoon, swirling green-gray maple, a gap to light my ponderance, earth shard, rod, torching in the earliest July winks, buzz me when I'm furthest up the shit ladder, curving in a parted cloud, shorty, noshing ravenous with strangers like Jesus twice glazed. This one's called Like Unicorns. It's after a Jack Spicer poem, if anyone's familiar. Towards you, parading, spine bulbed with thought, its yoky inferno, dunking millions over mountains. To learn to kerplunk aquamarine, curl to lakes in Gary, Indiana, wherever my zeniths herded, looping as a shooter star, my friend, arriving. When the final building clamors a cough from the prince, my legs do weave away towards you. 2 purple lines, 2 marathons from a well's worth of honey to my open eye. Baking in your heat of heat. Sweating flowers bed to droop my shoulder, like swings from heavy sugar birds or battering rams alight their stony wobble. Figure all curl down the mountain's leg, which eases to my vanguard, tearing. I sunk the moon in merely weeks. Secret tones between ocelots pours syrup invisibly. Royal green lake of park I slouched through, crowned, fucked, and diving on a Merlot rip, wide as apples, drooling their juice for yapping mouths below to regret to savor. But I'm not pinching one single penny. My chubby spine sheathes itself in purple beams of no depletion, when eyes as sweet as July 5th puke poem. Like a platter of cattle passing the passenger side of drives with ivy lips, ballads to punt past the constant lake, stupid goat serenity breath. In the pit of my cigarillo dives a moonlit pissant who just fucked Cupid, and every evening he recalls across me a warm gash to stiffen to armor. Clusters of freckle float my heel. My love, my love, my love, my love, my love, my love, my love. Every morning is a bleeding. Every ton is slick with voluptuous names. And I'm already over time, so I'm going to cut it short there. But thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, Joyce, you were going to say something?
I'd love to have the text.
Oh yeah, we can connect you guys afterwards.
Okay.
I would love to send it to you, Joyce. And I was also going to say, yeah, if it's okay, I'll drop my email in the chat. And anybody who wants to take a look at other works in progress I have or the manuscripts I'm working on, I'd love to. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you so much, PJ. And thank you so much, Joyce and Anne. And thank you everyone for your love in the chat today. Just a reminder that Joyce's exhibition will be open through this Friday at DC Moore Gallery. So if you're able to go see it in person and take a look at those textures, then please do that. And please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation titled Heroes and Sheroes, Corita Kent, featuring Jeffrey Gibson, Carrie Moyer, and Dan Cameron. And we'll conclude with a poetry reading from the one and only Amma Birch. And I will pass you all a mic so you can all say goodbye as you leave. Thank you again and have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joyce. Thanks, Anne.
Joyce.
Thanks, PJ.
Wonderful work.
Thank
Wow.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thanks, PJ.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Joyce.
Oh, thank you,
Thank you,
Joyce.
Catherine. Graceful as
Thank
always.
you.
Thank you.
So great.
Thank you.
I hope millions of people stream into DC Moore now.
Oh, me too.
Tell all your friends, get them up and running.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can't wait for
Nice to see you, Ann.